Let's get sweaty.
Hey guys, welcome to this bonus episode of the Shenmue Dojo show. Today we are going to be looking at and reviewing the documentary A Gamer's Journey. It's been a long time coming, but I have to say, finally watched it and glad to have watched it. But before that, James, man, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, thanks, Matt. Yeah, been a long time coming, this documentary, this momentous occasion. It's finally here. We've both watched it, and we've actually got a copy to give away as well if you want to stick around during the show, Matt. But I'm okay. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Roasting in the office, but I'd rather be roasting than freezing, so I shouldn't complain too much. So, guys, for everybody, what we're going to be doing is reviewing A Gamer's Journey, the Shenmue documentary. We're going to go for about an hour and a half on this. We're going to talk a little bit about the history and how this sort of concept came about from its very, very early roots to the Kickstarter to the finished product. We're going to then run through the documentary itself, sort of picking out key points we liked, our impressions of it, talk about the soundtrack, those sorts of things as well. We'll then look at the special features and some of the things that are in there. There are some that aren't on disc but are available on the digital formats, which we'll sort of touch on because there's some really good stuff in there as well. And then at the end, we'll sort of give our final impressions, rate it out of 10, and talk a little bit about the competition that James has just mentioned as well.
Good stuff.
So, diving straight into the introduction then. Now, this project started all the way back in 2014 and it was intended to be essentially a very small Shenmue documentary, inspired essentially to help get Shenmue 3 made and raise awareness of Shenmue and all the rest of it. So 2014, footage started being shot. The unthinkable happened in 2015. Yep. Shenmue 3 gets announced, and it then put all of Adam's plans completely to pot, and they had to start again basically with this. It then culminated in the 2018 Kickstarter project, which I'm sure by Adam's admission took a lot longer than they'd have liked to get this thing through the door. When you think we're now nearly 9 years on, in fact, from the original concept to this coming through and hitting people's doorsteps. You've had to deal a lot with a lot. Yeah, a massive journey. When you think we've had to deal with, obviously, Shenmue 3 being announced, being released, COVID in between that.
The emotions, I bet they were.
Like a roller coaster, went up and down all the way through. And then some tricky times with the Kickstarter, I think it's fair to say. There were some quite nasty comments floating around, which are never justified. I understand frustration around it, absolutely. But people need to keep their shit together, quite frankly.
You get that with every project, really, don't you?
You do, but it's still... They did, in the end, fulfill all the rewards. It took them a long time, but one thing I can say before we sort of dive into this in detail is they've done a really good job with this documentary, and we were all very, very, very excited to get this thing in our hands. It's a literal journey of the history of Shenmue and Sega with some stops along the way, and people are probably still getting their copies hit the door as we speak, as we record this thing. So I'm going to dive straight in now. First impressions, what did we think of this documentary? James, go into it a little bit. Give me some overall thoughts on this thing. What did you make of it?
Okay, so we've watched it digitally.
Yeah.
Probably about a year ago, whenever it was released publicly to the Kickstarter backers, and it kind of, I don't want to go like over the top in saying like it blew me away, but obviously, as in terms of documentary format, style, presentation, I think it's very professional. It is something that you would expect to see on, a streaming service like Netflix or something like that. You could even imagine the little thumbnail, clicking on it. Yeah. You're sitting down and watching this story of Sega, of Shenmue, of Yu Suzuki, of everything that's quite well detailed within the documentary. So it really impressed me actually at first. I watched it obviously this time last year whenever it was released to the public, and all the special features and stuff. And yeah, I was pretty much fulfilled, barring receiving this awesome Blu-ray, which we've got see if I can show you this a little bit. So this is the actual physical that is landing on people's doorsteps at the moment. Impressed with the overall packaging as well.
Yeah, definitely.
It came out really nicely actually as a physical media piece. In fact, I think I've seen him. He's the camera focuses back. He released a picture on Twitter. I think it's gone in some shops somewhere.
Yeah,
he was showing. Did you see
shop,
that?
Wasn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, in a gaming
cool.
shop, he had it on a shelf or whatever. So that's really awesome. That must be awesome to see that for Adam, like actually getting his product on a shelf. And then, like you touched upon, Matt, there's like some extra things on the Blu-ray that weren't in the actual digital release.
Mm-hmm.
There's this 10-minute behind-the-scenes piece of footage that I was just in awe of watching. Getting to actually see hands-on Yu Suzuki, which we'll go into a bit more detail later, but those were nice little additions to the disc-based version. And I just thought it was a really well-made documentary. We put it on, me and my wife. I made her watch it basically. I don't know what she thought she was getting in for, but I think she was expecting, like, when I said we're going to watch the Shenmue documentary, I think she thought it would probably be like more like a YouTube fan made, hashed together sort of thing. And actually, she was quite impressed. I don't think she was expecting it to be so well produced, actually. So you've got the seal of approval from my wife there. How about you, Matt?
That's from a non-Shenmue fan as well. Honestly, I was really, really impressed with it. Obviously, like you said, James, we had the benefit of seeing the rough cut a few years back, seeing it digitally back in 2022, and then obviously seeing it again with the physical copy, which landed on my doorstep sometime late April, I think it was. So it's been a little while for me, and I have rewatched it again just to sort of get up to speed with it. Really professionally put together. I think it stands out. You can see it's been made with care, attention, and love. I mean, Adam's a massive Shenmue fan, so you'd expect nothing less in that regard. And I think the journey it takes you on is something that actually is quite emotive for a Shenmue fan. It may not resonate with everybody in gaming, but I think there's enough there for somebody who isn't a Shenmue fan to pick this up and understand quite where this passion comes from, and why the community are so vocal and so into this game. I mean, we may as well segue into the documentary itself now. It makes absolute sense to at this point. That opening scene where you see you've got the music playing in the background, you've got the scene with the Saturn, and it pans over, and you see the guy taking the Shenmue disc out and popping it into the Dreamcast. Like, for me, that transports me back to being a 14-year-old kid. And you sit there and go, yeah. It's really emotive. That's like that opening. Like, it made me choke up, because that's my childhood in a 2-minute scene, isn't it?
Everyone's bedroom from that era, right?
I mean, that bedroom was probably slightly less messy than mine, but we'll
less
ignore
messy.
that fact. Okay. But that scene sets the tone, I think, for the journey that we end up going on. And it's a long, winding journey of Shenmue with a lot of stops on the way. Obviously, there's the Kickstarter dinner, there's the Sega history. They look at Yu Suzuki's history as well, which is massively underrated. And actually, if you're looking for his history, this documentary is a really good point, a good starting point for that, I think. And one thing I think stands out is the interviews with people like Michael Huber and people like that, who have been along this journey with us the whole way through. And that passion that comes through from them is pretty much one-to-one with what the community were thinking. And when you think of, I think, how they interdisperse things with the music, which is an original score and works exceptionally well, and the little stops on the way with the developers, etc., I think they did a cracking job. And I'm going to sort of dive into sort of the setup of it, if you like, the way they did this, the way they structured it. How did you feel around the whole structure of the documentary from start to finish?
Yeah, I personally, I thought it was well structured. Like you say there, the use of interviews, footage of Yu Suzuki, and then you've got the sort of Kickstarter dinner and Adam and Peter and the other guy that was on the Debuita Street actually walking around and showing you this on set location basically from the game. I mean, it's kind of like having two or more documentaries roll intertwined. It's like you've got this sort of, ongoing Sega history with the Yu Suzuki stuff, and then this sort of like the fans going off on their little journey as well. It's quite nice. I do feel like maybe there should have been a little bit more context behind some of the stuff that was going on. Obviously, you say it opens up nicely with the bedroom scene, but I'm trying to think of like the mindset of someone that doesn't really know what Sega is, perhaps doesn't really know what Shenmue is. Maybe they're just interested. Maybe they've heard about Shenmue. Maybe that recent top 100 games they've seen. Oh, what's the Shenmue number 41 or whatever, and find this documentary on a streaming platform or wherever they come across it. And I just feel like maybe they needed some sort of context to some of the things that were going on, like why, what's going on with Adam and Peter on Dewita Street. There's no real, unless you've played the game and you've got that sort of relationship with where the game's set. It's just a couple of people walking down the road kind of thing. And I feel like maybe it's great if you've got that sort of pre-assumed knowledge of Sega and gaming history. It just kind of like, if you haven't, it's like maybe the first half an hour and then you understand what's going on, if you know what I mean. So maybe it's not like it's instantly clear of the narrative of the documentary until maybe about half an hour in, when things start picking up and you get the ball rolling there and it starts coming together. So if you can stick around like for 30 minutes, then you've got all that. But maybe it could have just done with like a little bit of context at the start of these things, just to say like, introducing the whole reason for the documentary. I guess like this is such a passionate game series that we all love, and this is the reason why. And just sort of sum it up in a nutshell and then get on with the documentary is what I thought might have been useful to do at the start, and then maybe like a bit of context to what date, what's happening on the Dewita Street with Peter and Adam and stuff, and then that footage a little bit later where everyone's seen walking around with Yu Suzuki. There's no real context behind that, so maybe it would have been nice to say like, we backed Shenmue 3 at the 10 grand tier. This was like a Kickstarter dinner. Yu Suzuki showed us around. I know Peter says it's the best day of his life or whatever, which I could imagine it being. I just felt like maybe there was a few tiny little bits of context that was missing. Overall, other than that, a stunning documentary put together. And like I say, if you stick around all the way to the end, you will get all that context. It's just, I feel like if you're diving in without any pre-assumed knowledge, it may just take a little bit to sort of get into it. Is all I'd say.
It's probably compares to Shenmue a little bit, and it's a slow burner. You sort of like a puzzle piece. You're building the edges first to get that sort of context around what's going on, and then when it's done, that outline's done, and it starts filling in these gaps. You start the pace of the development, the game release, the reception of it, then sort of moving on into the sort of the dark ages of Shenmue, if you like. That's when it all really sort of comes together. And that sort of emotive bit for a non-Shenmue fan.
Yes, really exactly.
Hit home, where they start to make the links of, okay, this is why the fan base were so passionate about it. This is why people were clamoring for this series to continue. And the documentary, what I think does a really good job of doing, it, certainly for Shenmue fans, and I do think it does cross over to non-Shenmue fans, is give that emotion around it.
Definitely.
That feeling around quite why we're so insane about this thing.
Well, there's a lot really that they've got to cover, really, if you think about it. I feel like Adam may have mentioned this in the past, like how much he's had to cover, because it's not just a story about Shenmue.
No,
he's got to provide context to like, well, who's Yu Suzuki? What's Sega? Who are all these people that are involved in the creation of the game? Going all the way back to 1999, and you can't just stop there. It's like, oh well, there was a Sega Saturn build. This is something that was worked on. This is like something that Sega put all of their sort of marketing towards, all of the money. This was going to be the big killer title that was going to revitalize the company and bring the Dreamcast into the forefront of gamers everywhere kind of thing, and they've got to
Yeah.
cover all those things. But then you go even further back now, you've got to go all the way back to the 80s to sort of suggest, like, Yu Suzuki, the reason why they chose Yu Suzuki as the leader of this project, his magnum opus or whatever, is because he had such success with these arcade titles from back in the day. So there's so much that they've got to cover. I think the structure that they had to go for in the end is probably better than most people could do with all that information that you've got going there. So any little nitpicks, like I was mentioning about the context and stuff, it's just so hard just to put that stuff together that I don't even... You can't literally do it, I don't think. I think it'd be too difficult to structure this sort of a film with that much context required, that I think the end result was probably as best as you could get.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to be storyboarding this with all that context and history. When you think, and part of the thing they do really well here is when they're talking about the Sega history, they get lots of shots up of like old arcade titles, so like Outrun, Space Harrier. You see a cabinet of Virtua Fighter in an arcade somewhere. I think they shoot one of, I can't remember which game it is. They shoot one of the games in a bowling alley, and you can sort of see
Virtua Fighter. You've got
so you see the pan shot of the arcade machine, and that gives a really sort of big added context to what they're talking about and the progression that Sega had as being pioneers essentially in gaming. First 3D fighter, for example, why Yu Suzuki essentially established himself as one of the top developers, engineers in gaming. At that point in history, he was up there with the very, very best. And actually, and I said this before, the history section around Yu Suzuki and the impact he had on gaming is second to none in my mind. If you want a quick stop history of Yu Suzuki, watch this documentary, because it really gives you a feel for quite how influential he was, and also how he gave Sega a lot of credence, a lot of success, and gave them integrity. So when you sort of come, and they talk about this in the documentary, when you come out of the Saturn era, which, let's be honest, for Sega outside of Japan was a total shit show. Great console, don't get me wrong, great games on it, but it got absolutely smashed by the PlayStation in the West. They turned to their secret weapon essentially and said, right, let's revitalize this company, let's push this forward, let's push the envelope. And that's what Shenmue was there to do. It was the line in the sand. It was a game that wasn't just to be played, it was to be an experience, and people shouldn't be limited. And it came over really well in the documentary for me, that they were trying to not just develop a game, but develop something groundbreaking. And part of like the structure of this documentary, I really like how they interdisperse these points with the development staff talking about the time on the game and how they were putting things together. Like, for example, when it started out, it was The Legend of Akira, and they were on at Yu Suzuki for what seems like quite a long time to go drop Akira, do an original character. And then he sort of came round to the idea and said, okay, we're going to do that now. And they talk about all the weird and wonderful ideas that Yu Suzuki had at the time, and they're going, how the fuck do we put this together? Because it was all new. But I think having that context from the developers in there really gives a flavor of quite how groundbreaking this thing was, and why it was and still is in a lot of people's minds a sort of Concord moment of gaming. It was the moment that the AAA title effectively, in my mind, was born. And to see this history through the documentary with the respect they handled it with, I think it speaks volumes for how good this thing actually is. And that's without going into the use of like the chapter tiles, which we'll talk about, and some of the footage from the Dreamcast, etc. I mean, James, take us away on some of that footage they showed and how it sort of really adds to this journey, if you like.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they've got some really awesome like composite shots of a Dreamcast on sort of they do this quite often where they've got like a CRT in the background, and they sort of blur the sides and the focus, really professionally shot, aesthetically pleasing, how it just sort of pans over the Dreamcast and then shows the footage on the the CRT TV. It really harkens back to that 1990s era of CRTs and footage and that sort of concept and stuff. Just wanted to pick up on a point you were saying about, obviously, this footage. You got Yu Suzuki talking, and I really appreciate that. I really like getting these little inside things, and especially for the audience, that people who perhaps don't really know about Shenmue, they've heard how groundbreaking it was and stuff, and then they're actually seeing all these ideas and concepts that Yu Suzuki was coming up with, like the magic rooms he goes into, and just some of the things that they had to do that was like groundbreaking for the time and still is kind of groundbreaking these days. But it had me thinking, when you're seeing this sort of stuff in the documentary, the footage where he's talking about he was stubborn, didn't want to change it from Virtua Fighter. Do you reckon if they had have kept it as Virtua Fighter name, it would have been more successful because it's already got that sort of history involved? It's sort of this Virtua Fighter. Everyone knows Virtua Fighter, whereas like Shenmue is like just a random name into it within that era. Obviously, they changed the character from Akira to Ryo. I just feel like maybe if we could go back in time and it was called Virtua Fighter RPG, do you reckon more people would have been interested in it because of the name?
Possibly, because like you say, you got brand recognition there. So that could lean into it. I guess the thing would be, and it's a wider topic around Shenmue as a game as a whole, and they talk about this in the documentary, that it's deliberately slow paced, especially Shenmue 1. Shenmue 2 is a bit quicker in the way it picks things up and moves things forward. If it's the exact same game, but with Virtua Fighter branding on it, it may have picked up a few more people, but I still think you probably would have experienced the same sort of criticisms that were leveled at Shenmue at the time. Not all are fair, but some are, in terms of it can be mundane, it's not necessary for everybody, and that's a completely different topic that I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole here. But I do think it would have carried a bit more brand recognition, which may have, I think, with when you think like Virtua Fighter 3 obviously came out on Dreamcast, Virtua Fighter 4 ended up on the PlayStation 2. You had VF5 on PlayStation 3 as a release title, and then it moved over to Xbox later on as well. It might have had that momentum from those games as well to almost like justify an additional entry via Virtua Fighter RPG 1, 2, 3, whatever it was going to be.
Really interesting thought. Only because it's discussed in the documentary, I ever really thought about it. But like you're saying, if once the game series moved across to the Xbox, the original Xbox, and it's Shenmue 2 on everyone's shelves, this brand new audience that haven't played a Sega game before, perhaps, their gaming background's not going to be the same as ours, where we picked up an original Xbox because of Sega, in a sense. Those titles that we wanted on the Dreamcast that then made the way to the original Xbox. But then these newcomers to the series, seeing a game called Shenmue 2 on the shelf, I don't know if it said Virtua Fighter RPG Chapter 2 or something like that, they may have been like, oh, what's this? I've heard about Virtua Fighter, because that was a much more well-recognised name in gaming, perhaps. It's just an interesting thought I just thought about with the mention. But yeah, you've got other composite shots, arcade machines, like you say, Mike, you've got the Virtua Fighter machine, really cool how they pan across the bowling alley. There was, I don't know where I've read this, maybe it was in an update, but Adam said that they actually had to, I think they were friends with the owner of the bowling alley or something.
Yeah.
And he was like really on board. He was like unplugging it from where obviously it was to put it in front of a bowling alley for these shots. So, they managed to pull quite a few strings to get things and these sort of shots together. And obviously they travelled to Japan. That was like what most of the Kickstarter budget was required for, really, like getting them all across there with the filming equipment, going into the WiseNet studios and recording footage in there, which is amazing to see. It's, as a Shenmue fan, that is the sort of stuff you want to see, because you're always wondering, like, you don't see that behind the scenes stuff. We've had it with like the Shenmue premiere footage, that documentary. It's only really documentaries that you've had a glimpse into these studios where they're designing these games. And Shenmue, you've got these, you can picture it in your head, them all these people. Maybe it's because I've seen that Shenmue premiere footage where they're all sat down and there's like 300 computers, everyone sat in the little terminal, designing Shenmue. But yeah, it's when Shenmue 3 was announced and we were getting these Kickstarter updates, the footage that we've got in the documentary is what I was hoping to see in the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter updates. I was hoping to see more like someone sat in front of a computer designing this character. And we did see glimpses of that. But I think it comes out really well in the documentary, actually.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And actually, some of the behind the scenes stuff at Wisenet is some of my favourite bits and pieces, because actually you get history, you get context to essentially how the story of Shenmue's developed and how it moved forward. I mean, for example, we've got now, because of this documentary, high-res version of what, 6 or 7 of the chapter tiles now.
Yeah, stunning, isn't it?
And we've analysed those to death in terms of where they were going to be in the story. Are any of them going to be moved? But you can work out from that essentially the structure of the first 3 Shenmue games and how
it's insane. It's insane actually with the chapter tiles, because we've had them since GDC 2013 or whatever, but because they were low quality, finally getting those high res things, you're seeing details and things that you never saw before, and just adding more ideas and things in your head, like, oh, who's that character now? Because you can actually see them, whereas before they were just like a little pixel.
Yeah, and within that as well, they interviewed Kenji Miyawaki, who's one of the original artists for Shenmue, and he was talking about how Yu Suzuki took a liking to his art style and how that sort of then fed into all the concept art that we got, and some of that concept art was shown off in the documentary for the first time. Other bits were put into the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter as well. So it gives us a glimpse, I think, not just into behind the scenes, but to a good history timeline with some nuggets of information or things that, as Shenmue fans, we're going to take apart. We're going to absolutely analyse the shit out of anything that comes out of it. But for somebody who's not a Shenmue fan, it gives them a flavour of how this thing evolved, essentially. From when we think of evolution, you're talking the concept of like the old man and the peach tree, all the way through to that tower demo, all the way into the Saturn version, the changeover to Dreamcast, all the beta footage that they showed off there, and then obviously into the release and, as I said, the dark years of Shenmue and what happened there. And one thing I think this documentary lends itself really well to is the use of like, I want to use the word, almost celebrity fans, I guess is the word I'd use when you think
I know
of
what you
it.
mean. Like YouTubers and
yeah, exactly. So you've got like Michael Huber of obviously game trailers and Easy Allies fame. He's quite prominent in this documentary, talks through a lot. You've got Blake Harris, you've got Adam Karlik, Ryan Payton, you've got Peter Moore who was talking about it from his time at Sega. Obviously Yu Suzuki, lots of the developers are present throughout, and I think the fan context of this is a key driver, I think, in this documentary as we move later through. So we've been through the sort of Shenmue 1 segment, we lead into Shenmue 2, and not a bugbear of mine, I guess, is I wish I'd have had more around Shenmue 2. It was very quick, wasn't it, in terms of you had the release of Shenmue, there's like Shenmue 2 then released, then it disappeared. And actually I'd like to a little bit more around Shenmue 2, what it did, how it, like maybe some more around why and the hows it came to Xbox. I mean, I make no secret, I want Peter Moore on the interview series to discuss that very point. Yeah. But I'd have liked more around Shenmue 2 and then why that may have failed, how it came to Xbox, and that sort of context around. Obviously, Michael Huber describes the ending and why we're so mental for it. Yeah. But a bit more around what sort of happened in the build-up to it disappearing almost. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of see the reason why. Obviously, more people are going to know about Shenmue 1, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a given. So more people are going to relate to what they're talking about, this brand new open-world game, first of its kind. Yokosuka, everyone knows about sailors and all that sort of stuff. So structuring the documentary around the first game for the most part, which is probably like, I mean, the length of the documentary I think totals to like 1 hour 15.
Something like that, yeah.
And then you've got the credits, which are like 10 minutes added onto that. But within that 1 hour 15, perhaps maybe the first 45 minutes are Sega's history, a little bit on Yu Suzuki, whatever, and Shenmue 1. Yeah. And then you've got the sort of 5-minute segment on Shenmue 2, which, like, I agree with you, I would have liked to have seen a lot more on that, especially knowing that Adam Scipione's favourite game was Shenmue 2. That's where he started. He started with Shenmue 2 on the Xbox one of those people that probably picked up Shenmue 2 on the Xbox and on a shelf, like I mentioned earlier, despite it not having the Virtual Fight name or whatever. But so yeah, I was expecting it to be more tailored around Shenmue 2 because of those reasons. So it would have been nice to have a little bit more. Obviously, they skip over Shenmue Online and Shenmue City and all that sort of stuff when you think about it.
Yeah.
None of that stuff's actually mentioned. It goes directly from the end of Shenmue 2 to this Kickstarter announcement. So quite a flash. You're talking, what, 2002 Xbox?
Yeah,
2003 at the max, all the way to 2015. So there's like a big 10-year time skip, basically, almost. But the point you mentioned about Huber, that was a bit that my wife picked up on, because obviously I'm sat there with my wife, and she's like, that was the part where she's like, I understand now why you're so passionate and why you're such a Shenmue nut, because I think he describes it. I wrote it down here somewhere, but he says something like, you've got these two big stone mirrors in this cave, a floating sword, and it's like, what? And then it's, it cuts, the story continues, or the story goes on, and within that moment, my wife's like, okay, I kind of understand now. There's like this what the fuck moment, and we never got any context behind it for 18 years. So I think the documentary does that part well. Actually, it kind of, it shows why there's this lasting appeal, because you had such a crazy cliffhanger that was never rectified, never, continued upon all this time. So, and then because of the way that they structured the documentary from that, I suppose, which, to credit to Adam, perhaps that's why he decided not to go too much into the Shenmue 2 stuff, because it works out better to go from that moment to then this sort of uproar of emotion and stuff that everyone has when the third game's announced finally. It's like you're seeing this euphoria of Yu Suzuki walking on the stage, and the Huber moment is iconic, and it's just, that part sends chills. Your hair stand on the end even now. Throughout the documentary, man, I was not crying, but I was like really tearing up in segments, because I'm sat next to my wife, and obviously I don't want her to think I'm like this, this sob or whatever, sat next to her, crying over these things.
Yeah.
But these the way that they structure it, and some of the words that people are saying, and seeing Yu Suzuki talking about his project, and all this sort of love that everyone's putting into Shenmue, you can't help but tear up. And then you get these moments, and you sort of reliving those periods of time in your life when it takes you back to that Kickstarter moment, which just, you can't not tear over. I don't think it's very hard when you're watching the documentary. If you were one of those fans that had any sort of emotion like me and Matt has, when you're reliving that Kickstarter moment within the documentary, you can't help but it takes you back. It does it so well. I think that's a good positive for the documentary, that it does take you back to those moments.
It does, and we know how emotive that Kickstarter was, and obviously everything that followed it. But I think what, like you say, that jump almost, it builds up that height of emotion from Shenmue 2 to that real peak of the Shenmue 3 announcement, which obviously for Adam and his point of view changed everything with this documentary. Because as I said at the top of the show, it was starting essentially to get attention for Shenmue, and then Shenmue 3 gets announced, and they had to change their plans and everything else around it, and sort of winding it back a little bit as well in terms of what you said around the Shenmue Online, Shenmue City stuff. I wonder whether, obviously, I think it's probably a creative decision as well, that they didn't want to go too much into that sort of thing, because there's a lot, I guess it's a lot of false starts within that timeline, which for us probably make a lot of sense, but whether that made much sense to the average fan or not, I don't know, and that's probably why they didn't put that in. It is that they mention like a few times around rumors around E3, but they don't explicitly go into the Shenmue Online, Shenmue City stuff, which I can understand it, because I think if you're a casual gaming fan, that's not really going to have any sort of relevance to you, other than, they tried to bring it back. So
and had difficulty doing it.
Yeah, and if you've got then a sort of a time-limited documentary of an hour, 15 hour and a half, you have to be really, like you said at the top of this, you have to be really selective with what you put in there. So I can see why they, cut that thing. I'd love to know if there's any sort of cut footage somewhere of this sort of stuff, and they did talk about it, because I'd love to see it.
Yeah, definitely.
But my experiences, especially around Shenmue Online and some sort of digging I've done recently around that, is that there's a lot of litigation around it and people don't want to talk about it. So there's something off with that, but I'm going away at a tangent. Winding it back, obviously we then get into the dark years with this documentary, and it's moved through at a fairly consistent pace here, with lots of interviews, lots of artwork interdispersed on this journey as we go. We see bits from Peter, Adam, and Alex Munoz, I think's his name, from
that's him, yeah.
from the Debweta stuff, leading up to this Kickstarter moment. And actually, I think this is where then they lean on Ryan Payton a little bit here, and he starts talking about the Kickstarter and getting in touch with Yu Suzuki and how this thing came about, which, that sort of thing's gold dust in terms of that he reached out to Yu Suzuki, and it's something he said to me when I interviewed him. He reached out, and Yu Suzuki's first response was, "Who the hell are you?"
Who are you? Yeah.
Which is quite funny. But then obviously that then talks around the planning a little bit for the Kickstarter and how that manifested itself from an idea to actually being a realistic concept of, okay, we can do this thing through a Kickstarter, we can make this thing happen. And then they sort of lean on some of the fan sort of reviews and in interviews around the rumors around E3 and some of the fan I think the word I'm looking for is the fan involvement, I guess, around it. And
yes,
maybe a slight thing I'd like more of is some of the fan campaigns. When you think of the things that have happened over the year, they mentioned the toy capsule mailing, but like, for example, some of the things like Team U and the hashtags there, which was, in my view, massively instrumental in getting the community together and driving this thing forward towards not just saving Shenmue 3, but saving Shenmue as a franchise.
Yeah,
I would have maybe liked more of that. Is that fair?
I agree. I feel like without the fan community, we perhaps wouldn't have got that Kickstarter moment. So I think because the fans were passionate over all these years, stuck to it, never gave up, never gave in, was the reason why people like Ryan Payton and Yu Suzuki, they come together and they're like, there's still an audience out there. There's still people that are pining for this. It hit the PlayStation #1 most requested game or whatever. There was these things that were happening. People weren't shying away from Shenmue. People weren't giving up on it. Even through the dark period, like you say, where fans could have given up because of it. Probably is because of that ending of Shenmue 2 that people fought for. We need to know what's happening here. We need to know what's going to happen next. And I reckon they could have maybe factored that a little bit more into the narrative, but other than that, it does that jump well. I can understand that jump.
So then, obviously, building away from the sort of the community aspect, which I like we've both said, they did mention some of it. We'd have liked more of it. It then sort of starts coming into the rumors around E3, and it's coming back, and then they show the announcement, which, as you say, James, conveys that emotion of, oh my fuck, this thing's back, it's real, it's happening. And I can't remember who it was, but one of the interviewees said he described it like an old friend coming back from the dead. That's how he described it, that you thought they were long gone, long done, and they came back. And then it talked about the Kickstarter smashing all the records and that sort of context around the hype that this thing was back, that Shenmue had come back. And I appreciate they obviously had to stop the documentary somewhere, and they did all their footage and filming around sort of 2018-19. So the build to release, I think, maybe didn't get covered as much as maybe we'd have liked, but I can understand where or why that came from, if that makes sense. Okay, so moving away, obviously we've had the Kickstarter, and as I said, the build to release isn't there, but we understand why. It talks a lot about the Kickstarter, and you then see the footage of Peter, Alex, and Adam going around Dobuita, meeting Yu Suzuki, and going on that Kickstarter dinner. You also see a couple of shots. I think you see Landisi walking around somewhere as well. There might be a very slight shot of Joe Kitchen in there. I don't know,
Possibly.
but there's a few of them in there. But it's, for people who don't know what this is, this was a $10,000 tier for the Kickstarter for the Kickstarter campaign at the time. You backed $10K, and you got like a dinner with Yu Suzuki. You got to see some like pre-footage of Shenmue 3. You got you go around to Buita with him and all the rest of it. And it was I'm jealous of it. And
yeah, me too.
I don't know about the debt that people probably got in over it, but
still in debt.
Yeah, probably still are. But seeing that concept, that idea of meeting Yu Suzuki and going around seeing those locations, man, that's amazing.
That's where I think, like we touched upon earlier, they could have done with a little bit more context. I think if you present that to the audience, that these are people that have paid this amount of money to be shown around with Yu Suzuki, and then that goes back to how they interspersed these Dobuita walk-in segments within the documentary as well. Obviously, earlier on, before the Kickstarter announcement, the scene walking around on Dobuita Street, no real context. It's just Shenmue fans walking around on where Shenmue was set, basically the first game. And I was just wondering, Matt, what your thoughts and feelings was on that, like how it sort of goes from this intense interview style, and this playful style with people like Happy Console Gamer and Huber and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then you see these bits of Dobuita walking, which I think as a viewer, it does help to, so it's not too intense, it's not just constantly providing all this information. It allows you to then sort of take a breath, sort of enjoy what's going on here before you go back into the nitty-gritty of the structure of the documentary or whatever. But obviously at times can feel a tiny bit out of place, and it breaks, like it does a good job of breaking up the documentary, I think. But again, it's like, what's going on?
I get it. I can get what you're saying, that actually it maybe needed a little bit more in terms of, like you said, the context of how it's come about and why. I think what they did was for two reasons, one of which you've already covered, which is I think it's a bit of light relief.
Yes.
In terms of, because as you say, it's quite intense. There's a lot of information to take on board here, and it does move at quite a pace. It's an hour and 15 documentary to cover the whole history of Shenmue, which is essentially 20 years, which is a massive time frame to condense down into such a small amount of time. But you see what I'm saying there, that it has to be condensed down, which is, again, a lot of decision making there, which I wouldn't want to have been making. I think the other reason for it is, I think, to stay true to its roots, in that it was a fan documentary. It was initially going to be a small fan project with interviews with fans and some of the voice actors, which we do see in the documentary as well. I think that was a very deliberate decision by Adam and the team to keep that element in there, to keep it real for us as Shenmue fans, and to sort of keep it grounded for people that maybe haven't seen this series before, and sort of try and understand a little bit of the roots of this documentary and how it's then essentially spawned into this massive project, which ended up in a successful Kickstarter and a pretty damn good documentary at the end of it.
And the gamers behind it, I suppose, you know, it is called A Gamer's Journey, so it is showing basically the journey of Adam, Peter, these people that played the game and then went on this journey, and then it took them all the way to Japan. I do get that, yeah, definitely.
And again, it's one of those, from a creative standpoint, it makes sense, and certainly for us as Shenmue fans, it's like taking us to Japan for the first time and seeing those things, because you've been lucky enough to go out there, I haven't. So for me, that I found that section really, really interesting as somebody who does want to eventually go out there and visit. But also for non-game, or not non-Shenmue fans, not non-gamers, but non-Shenmue fans, actually you can see how close to life this thing was, and what they were going for in terms of the creative process of Shenmue, and why it was so groundbreaking from a creative standpoint, that they were creating this world that essentially had never been done before. So giving it that context, plus grounding it in the roots of the documentary of originally being a small fan project, I think that's where that comes from, and I think it is quite effective in showing everybody quite why they went to Japan and that journey that they went on, and why they did back at $10,000 at the end of the day, because
that's
a shed load of money that I'm pretty sure that I'd never have that amount of money ever just to blow without getting a loan or something. So it's
I'm glad that footage is there as well,
Yeah.
because obviously we got a little bit of glimpse into what that must have felt like for those people as well. Obviously, you're always curious about what the dinner's going to be like, what happens on that day, and getting a little bit of a glimpse of that actually was nice that they included that.
Absolutely, and it then sort of one thing I think, sort of moving away from the video footage, I guess, is the music for this thing. Now, the whole thing was it's an original score mixed in with some Shenmue music, which makes absolute sense. The anime did that as well. They took some original tracks and then made their own. Makes absolute sense. I think for me personally, that the music really accompanies it quite well. It has that Shenmue feel for it, and it's really emotive, some of this music, actually, in those key moments when you think of the opening, when you think of Shenmue's release, when you think of the Kickstarter. That's where the music really conveys that message and really adds to that sort of punch in the gut feel, if you like, of quite what those emotions were at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It needs to be there, I think, to add that additional emotion to what you're watching, what you're hearing throughout. Like you say, that introduction music. I can hear the credit music now. I love the way it ends. I love that music, the way it starts and the singing. Really great pieces of music. There's only one for me that was a little bit overused, and I feel like it's used mostly with the interview stuff. You've got the, it's like da da da, it's like constantly da 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 throughout, kind of thing. That one's perhaps a little bit repetitive, but like you say, Matt, other than that, the music's fantastic that they've used within there. It's, apart from that one piece, it's when it's well used, you don't notice it, if you know what I mean. It's so well used that you don't really think about it. We're only thinking about it because we have to talk about these things, and when you actually pick up on it, it's used well to get the extra emotion from the viewer. But as you're watching it, you're not really thinking about the music and the shift in the tones and that sort of stuff. It's just there to accompany the footage, to draw these emotions out of you as the viewer watching it. And I think because the way it does that, it does it really well. Yeah,
I'd agree. And I can't remember the name of the bloke who wrote it, but I'm sure Adam will comment when we release this who it was, and he'd be in the credits anyway. But I do think the score, is 99 out of 100. It's fantastic, and I think they've really studied the Shenmue feel with it, and it does convey that Shenmue feel while being original and being new, and also being slightly different with it as well. And again, it's part of a really good package here for any Shenmue fan or any non-Shenmue fan who's just interested in this thing, in how it, I think, touched a lot of people is probably the word I would use here, and why it's quite so special. And obviously at the end you have the credits, all the fan photos that are there, and all the backers and everything that have made this thing possible. And I think that adds to it almost. That
definitely does, especially with that music that I said, the vocal music that plays towards the end there with the credits playing.
Yeah, it closes things down really, really nicely. And I don't know if I can convince Adam to do a second one for Shenmue 4 when we get there, but we'll see. But that rolls off sort of the main context and content of this documentary. One thing that they also did with this thing was a lot of extra content, and there were Kickstarter backer tiers, which I'll show in the final edit, of course, in terms of what you could back for and what you'd get for it. There's Kickstarter fan submitted videos. I did one, God knows how many years ago. I had a shitload more hair and a very much smaller Shenmue collection than I do now.
Yeah, it's still nice to see though, Matt, because obviously then that shows the journey that you've been on as well. That was like your probably one of the first times in front of a camera, right, for Shenmue material.
it was literally
Content.
the first time I've ever been in front of a camera for Shenmue ever. And
So-
I don't know why I backed it. I thought fuck it and backed it that tier when it was out.
Yeah, I was hovering around that, and then I ended up just going for the photo and the credits is the tier that I went for. But you're there, you're embodied in Shenmue history and folklore, whatever, on a disc, even long gone after you're dead, Matt. If someone picks up this documentary in 100 years' time,
I'm immortal.
Immortalized, yeah. Your very first piece of video footage of yourself.
So that, God, I look back at that and cringe a little bit now when you consider all the videos and things that we put together. But that's another story for another day. But one thing I do want to touch on is behind the scenes for Shenmue 3.
Amazing.
Which is really cool to see this. It's only sort of a 10-15 minute short, this thing, and it shows Yu Suzuki being what I'd consider quite hands-on with Shenmue 3.
Yeah.
He's talking about the Shrine Maiden model work and ensuring that she's perfect. He calls her an A-rank character.
That goes back to that Shenmue stuff, doesn't it, where he's got like these ranks of these characters for how well the model. He's still in that mindset, which I'm sure maybe not, maybe it still costs a lot of money, but with Unreal 4 and Unreal 5, is it not more like easy to have these sort of great looking character models? But he's still got this sort of tier mindset, hasn't he? Where you've got your low end character models.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what he's calling them. Maybe he's got like an A, a B, a C rank.
Yeah, probably.
I don't know where Mr. Muscles fits in that, but obviously he's probably one of the S rank. He's probably one of the poorer models, to be honest, in my opinion. And you've got your Mr. Ke or whatever. These people that answer the door and they look a bit strange compared to these really photorealistic characters, models of like the Shrine Maiden. You know what I mean? Like you just touched upon there. She's got an awesome character model. So calling her an A rank is Mr. Ke a C rank, for example. So when he opens the door, he's got this sort of squarish head.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, when you look at this and when he's looking at Schilling, and I think it's at the time that they're about to go and take the boat over to the castle. And I spoke to Adam about this before we recorded this, and it was filmed at around the end of 2018. So at that point, they were probably still pushing for the August 22nd release that year, but obviously it got bumped back to November 19th. So it says to me at that point, Baisha probably had been cut. And they'd obviously truncated the ending to the castle. And then since then, I think we then know that Cedric obviously said they changed the ending again. So they've had essentially two changes of ending to this thing from what I can gather.
Well, I was going to say, you can sort of see where they've had to go there, because obviously they probably know by the end of 2018, and they've got this deadline of August, the original release date or whatever it was going to be. They sort of know how long it's taken them to get to that point and how long they've still got left to go. So they could probably gauge that they're not going to have enough time to complete Baisha. So like you say, this is probably the time where they were starting to like think that we're going to have to change the ending slightly here, cut the Baisha thing, and really work on what's going on here. Because like you say, you've seen footage of the boat journey, aren't you? You've got the characters there. The Master Bay, Schilling, Ren, Rio. You've seen those people there. So they're working on the boat scene there at the end of 2018. So I know they delayed the game until November.
Yeah.
But going off that original release date of August, if this is the end of 2018, they've got 8 or 9 months to wrap up the project, haven't they, basically?
Yeah.
And they probably got Deep Silver at that point breathing down the necks, saying like, get this, make sure you get this out for August. So I mean, what else would they have needed to have done at that point? It's hard to say if they're still working on the way that Schilling's hair sort of flaps or whatever they were working on at the end of 2018. Perhaps this was where they decided to start expanding the Awu more, potentially. Start adding more roads, more shops. Because obviously we got that concept art of Niawu where it was like this sort of small remote port town, much smaller. So whether it was like, look, we're never going to get Baisha done, let's just continue what we're working with here and expand Niawu a little bit, add some polish to this bit, polish to that bit, and I just think it's incredible seeing this footage of Yu Suzuki go around, going behind these developers of the game, saying like, "Oh, I'm not too happy with that." He actually points out, I think it is that boat scene where he's saying like, I forget his name, the panda, Kung Fu Panda guy.
Yeah, I know who you mean.
Yeah, from the temple that Rio takes across the boat, the one with the the bally. He pushes him into the with his bally dunty.
River, doesn't he? Yeah.
He's saying, I think the way his hands like tap his legs or something was a little bit too silly, and he was saying like he'd rather cut the whole scene than have this silly moment. So he was telling the guy to like make sure you change all that, make it less humorous or whatever. It's just fun seeing Yu Suzuki going back to his roots. I think he's perhaps hasn't worked on a big project like Shenmue 3 since Shenmue 2 even. I know he worked on Virtual Fighter 4 or whatever, but you don't know if he's more of a director in those sort of games, whereas like Shenmue is hands-on, where he was going around, he was shouting at people, he was telling people off. You know, people were having to stop what they were doing, remake stuff. You know, you've seen like multiple Shenmue 2 environments, haven't you, when we were looking at the beta footage of Aberdeen. It's like they completely scrapped all of Aberdeen and remade it. So to see Yu Suzuki in Shenmue 3 still having that sort of mindset, not resting on his laurels, you know, if there's something he doesn't like, he makes sure that it's right.
Yeah.
As much as input as he can give to try and correct things that he's got in his vision, which you know, is a testament to the mind of such a great game producer.
Yeah, it is, and that he's not accepting of that'll do. He wants the best for his projects, and I think that's probably, it goes into the logistics around how Shenmue 3 was developed and etc, and the team sizes and all of that, which again, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole here, but to see that sort of hands-on feel that he was going around these people's desks and going, right, this is off, this hair's off, I need it to move like this, she's an A-rank character, or the hands aren't quite right here, I need it's silly, I need this, I want it this way. That's the sort of thing that I think people maybe forget a little bit, and it's really cool to see him in action doing that and talking to his team, and he's quite calm and respectful about it, but he's very clear at what he wants.
Yeah, it's not like he's being petty or anything. It's like it's coming from a genuine sort of like, you know, I need it to be this way kind of thing. But like you say, he does it so nicely. He's like smiling, laughing, and obviously the guy's not like, oh, Yu Suzuki, man, I've just spent like 2 weeks doing a hair like this, and now he's like, you know, it's not like that kind of relationship. It's like a nice relationship. It's like, yeah, okay, we'll fix that. Don't worry about it. And it's just nice to see. It's the kind of footage that I always envisioned seeing, or you know, I want to see how this game was produced. Like I think you said in the past, Matt, it'd be nice to get like a GDC of what it took to make a Shenmue 3. I think there's like a real post-mortem topic of conversation there to, you know, some of the trials and tribulations, the challenges, how they managed to get this game created from the ground up, going off of, you know, these beloved titles of Shenmue 1 and 2 to producing a Shenmue 3 title in 2015, 2016, 2017, all the way up to 2019 when it was released, that 4-year period. How was that experience? Because it would have been nice to have had that documented to a T, and I do think that there is definitely potential there for, you know, a GDC talk or something from Yu Suzuki about how that was made.
Sure. And actually, what it does do very well here is just gives us a very small flavour in this documentary's behind-the-scenes footage of what they were dealing with, how they were working. So moving off of that, there's also behind-the-scenes recording with Bill Black and Corey Marshall, who were recording the English dub at the time. We've been quite lucky that Bill obviously supplied us some footage as well, which is fantastic. But they also let Adam and his team into some of the recordings. So you could one reoccurring theme I think comes through this behind the scenes footage from Yu Suzuki's footage at Wisenet and Bill Black here and Corey Marsh, is that how much care is being put into this thing. Like this is being made in, and quite openly, on a budget, a very tight budget, but everybody is doing everything in their power to maximize how good they want to make this thing. And that comes through, I think, with this behind the scenes footage as well, with Bill Black and Corey, how they time him into what he needs to say. And Bill's quite, not harsh, but he's very much that's not right, we do it again. It's not good enough, we do it again. And that striving for quality, or as much quality as they could get with what they had, I think is testament to the people who've worked on this thing. And the documentary does a really good job of bringing that stuff behind the scene out of it and give some context into the people who worked on this thing. But one
really good point that is, Matt, because you think about the naysayers of Shenmue 3 who were saying it was a bad game and all this sort of stuff. I don't know if they've got that same sort of mindset where they're thinking it's just been lazily produced, the voice acting's just as bad as the originals, these people that didn't like the original English dubs or whatever. But when you're actually seeing the care and attention that went into the behind the scenes work here, the documentary does, like you say, do a good job of saying, like, no, actually, they did care about this project. Yu Suzuki was really hands-on, he wanted things done correctly, and and Bill Black was the same with the way he was doing it. He was saying, like, to Corey Marshall, can you, just a wow, that was a good wow, some of the things that Corey was saying, oh, we need to, can you take it up again, redo that, and seeing, like, actually how professional this behind the scenes recording was with Bill Black and Corey actually sort of stands out to me. Actually, was this exclusive to the Blu-ray? I don't remember seeing this before.
It's on the digital site now, but
right.
I don't remember seeing it. It may have been, but I don't remember seeing it at the time when the original digital release happened. I could be wrong in that.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but I don't remember seeing either the Yu Suzuki behind the scenes 10-minute thing or that little segment with Bill Black. I don't remember that personally.
But
awesome.
It's a really, really nice insight into what happened behind the scenes. And between those two bits of footage, you've got probably about 20 minutes of behind the scenes, which is really cool. One thing that isn't on the disc but is on the digital, and I'd recommend everybody who's into the Shenmue lore and things that should watch this, about an hour and 15 minutes, is there's this it's raw footage from Wisenet where Yu Suzuki is going through the chapter tiles, the books, the scripts, and he's talking about them, and there's a camera over his shoulder, which I'd kill for the footage.
It's just amazing, mate. I think Adam was like shocked that they managed to let him film some of this stuff. I feel like I remember him saying that he couldn't believe that they just let him set up a camera, pointing it down as he's going through the pages of his concept art books, and he's got all these folders. It's so neatly organised. It's just amazing to see that stuff. That is a Shenmue fan's wet dream, really, just seeing these old original concept art drawings of Ryo, Shenmue, like you say, the concept art of the chapter tile artwork, just seeing that so personal as well, that sort of personal, it takes you to that moment. Obviously they're just stood there looking at the stuff that Yu Suzuki's showing them, and he's getting excited about showing them this folder, I suppose to him it's like a teasing him, oh look, you don't know who that guy is yet, but you might see him later, kind of thing, as he's going through these pages, like, wait, what was that picture there?
Yeah, it's like, that's a spoiler.
Yeah, I can't show you that, but just taking you to that position in their studio, looking at that, you kind of feel like you're there because of how raw this footage is, and that is, I definitely would recommend, like Matt says, if you can get a hold of the digital version of the documentary. I'm not quite sure how that's available and whether or not this is a Kickstarter exclusive. If it is it a Kickstarter exclusive?
Yes. So okay, so exclusive. You've got the link and the password, you can watch it.
Right.
And Adam was very clear that people shouldn't start throwing this link and password around the internet, so please don't. But if you haven't watched this stuff and you're a backer, watch it, because it's absolute gold.
Perhaps if you were like waiting for the Blu-ray to arrive, because that was your preferred method of watching, actually go find the email where you got your password and check the stuff out, because that's not on the Blu-ray, and it's definitely worth watching.
Absolutely. But a couple of things that are on the Blu-ray, there's a bonus feature with Adam Korolik, which looks like, I think your notes say this, bit of a drug deal and a sort of a random.
It does, the way it
park.
starts off. Yeah, he walks up to Adam and he's like shaking his hand and he's like, "Hello, I'm Adam Korolik," and opens the trunk of his car, and instead of like all this white gold drugs and stuff, it's just Shenmue merchandise.
Shenmue merch everywhere, so it's quite.
Which I suppose
funny.
is a drug to us.
It's quite funny. And then we sort of see shots of his collection. He talks about some of the variations of the things he's got in his Shenmue collection, which is really cool. And the other one, which James, I'll let you talk a little bit about, because they've obviously been on the disc for Shenmue World, and we get a Making the Shenmue, the Gang Edition.
Yeah, I had to double check actually, see if it was on this disc, but it's not. So if you want the full, where am I pointing the camera here? If you want the full Gang Edition Shenmue experience, obviously you've got this disc with issue 2 of Shenmue World. There's loads of content on this, loads of bonus footage, deleted scenes, bloopers. There's that interview that you did with the map from 2001. All 3 films, of course, like loads of special features on that. But one thing that isn't on there, which is on the A Gamer's Journey Blu-ray, randomly, I mean, obviously, I take it this was before. This was probably the leftover footage from 2014, when Adam was probably going around interviewing fans about the series, about the what their contribution was to the Shenmue saga, basically prior to the Kickstarter announcement of Shenmue 3. So this was probably footage that he was planning on using or integrating into the original narrative. So it's quite nice to see that. But you've got the sort of making of the Shenmue Gang Edition. Yeah. So you've got Mike, who's detailing how they produced Shenmue the Gang Edition 1, 2, and then subsequently 3. And the way he's talking about it in the documentary here, the special feature, is of someone that doesn't know Shenmue 3 exists. He sort of says, like, this was my contribution to sort of wrapping up the story. This was my sort of closure. I wanted to produce a sort of a Shenmue 3 story that sort of gave fans a little bit of closure, despite not having the game, kind of thing. And then obviously, I assume only months later, after recording this footage, Shenmue 3 was announced.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just neat to get this little extra here on this disc. If you're a fan of the Gang Edition stuff, the Gang Entertainment guys.
Yeah, absolutely well worth a watch. But both of them are absolutely hilarious and been around the community a long time and do some awesome work for the community. So, okay, then let's bring us into sort of our final thoughts about this documentary before I do a little bit around where you can find this bloody thing. So, give me a rating out of 10 and a quick summary, James. What did you think of it?
Oh, 10 out of 10. We're going to have to go for 9, I think. I think 9 is probably a good... I think 9 is what you gave it, actually, as well. But
yeah,
I just think what it does do well. Like I say, we've highlighted a couple of little negatives, maybe a little bit more context here and there required. Some petty negative I said was like, at least for me on my TV, the yellow subtitles at times were a little bit hard to read during some of the Japanese dialogue, because obviously the background of these interviewers occasionally was like orangey sort of coloured, so it sort of blended a little bit. That's just very, very minimal nitpicks things. The other little nitpick we had, Matt, was the Dead Eyes footage they used, which was a shame that they used that trailer. I don't know if there was some sort of legalities, perhaps when the footage moved over to Deep Silver or whatever, they would have had to have like asked Deep Silver if they could use the trailer in the film. So rather than do that, they just went with like the original Wisenet produced trailer, perhaps. I don't know. That's just something I thought about. Perhaps that's the reason why we still got that sort of Dead Eyes footage. Doesn't really do the game justice, in my opinion, to show the documentary people that haven't played Shenmue 3, because it kind of looks a bit silly seeing that, Ryo, like, he turns around like that. It's when it's been improved upon anyway.
Yeah.
But other than that, mate, I think what it does do amazingly well. And I think if you're a Shenmue fan, you've got to check out the documentary. I think if you've had any connection to Shenmue over the years, you're going to appreciate what Adam's done here and the team. If you're a Sega fan, you're going to appreciate some of the stuff that they've gone into detail there. Like I say, it's sort of like 2 documentaries in one. It's the Shenmue narrative and it's the Sega narrative, Yu Suzuki. So if you really like your Sega history, if you want to go a little bit more detail of Yu Suzuki's career, history, definitely check out the documentary, not just for the Shenmue stuff alone, but what they do there, they've intertwined all really nicely. It's a really well produced 1 hour 15 package there that does a fairly decent, like I'm saying, decent as a 9 out of 10 job of giving you that story from point A to point B and where we are today, to kind of pretty much.
Brilliant. Yeah, James, I completely agree with you. I've given it a 9 out of 10 as well. I was thoroughly impressed with the documentary as a whole. I think, like you say, there's some small nitpicky things, but they are very much nitpicky things. I don't think they're anything that would potentially ever put me off watching this again or anything like that. It does a really good job of detailing the history of Shenmue in a journey type format, which is exactly what they're going for. It gives Shenmue fans a lovely context to essentially how this game was put together and made and the thought processes behind it. And I think it gives non-Shenmue fans a little bit of history, not just of Shenmue, but Yu Suzuki and the contribution he had to gaming. And I think that aspect of this documentary is underrated, and it really should be put out there that Yu Suzuki was instrumental in the gaming and the games that we have today. And this documentary does a really good job of doing that side of things as well. But sort of coming away and sort of to close this thing down, I guess, as well, is people going to ask, where can I get this thing? Well, at the moment, and likely when this is released, copies will still be dropping on people's doorsteps. Most of the UK has been done. USA shipping's happening. Canada shipping's pretty much finished, and they're doing Europe and other territories as we speak. It will be available for sale. Some of the physical copies will be available for sale, so any leftover Kickstarter copies can be bought. Adam will communicate that in the not too distant future, hopefully. It is also going to be available on some streaming platforms. I don't know all of them, but I know one of them, and that's because someone on the Shenmue 500k found it on iTunes.
Interesting.
So you can buy it on iTunes, and it should be out on other streaming platforms not too far away from now as well. So you've got the opportunity to buy a digital copy, like to your chosen device, or you can get yourself what will be quite a limited run of physical copies as well. But that then, James, brings us into our competition and how you can win a physical copy of A Gamer's Journey.
Okay, Matt. And I assume all the bonus footage that we just spoken about is only available on these physical releases. I presume
so.
If you download the digital version from iTunes, it's not going to come with the bonus behind the scenes stuff. So definitely worth picking up the physical if you can. Like I say, we've got a sealed version here. Adam's kindly sent us an extra one, and I don't think we mentioned it, Matt, but it comes with a nice poster of Yu Suzuki. Really nice artwork there. If you would like to win that, all you have to do is subscribe to the dojo on YouTube here that you're watching this video on right now, like the video, and leave a comment below, and we're going to pick a winner from the comments below. Not sure when, Matt. You might be better placed to say when.
What I'd say we do with this is once we've released it, we'll go 7 days. So anybody who's liked, subscribed, and commented on the video in the first week of this release, you'll be entered into the draw to win your physical edition of The Gamer's Journey Definitive History of Shenmue. And it's well worth getting hold of a physical copy, because I don't know how many are going to be left once the Kickstarter stuff's all been said and done. Definitely. But guys, for now, thank you for dropping in on this review. We've had an absolute blast doing it. The documentary is absolutely fantastic. Any Shenmue fan must go and watch this thing. And if you don't, you're absolutely insane, quite frankly.
Go support it.
You go and support it. Leave reviews for it if you've enjoyed it on IMDb, iTunes, wherever it is, and voice how much you enjoyed this thing. I think it's sitting at 4.5 on IMDb currently already out of 5.
Good.
So it's doing pretty damn well.
That's really good.
So that's really good. But let's make sure if you're enjoying this thing, tell people about it, get the message out there, and try and push this thing up to the forefront as much as we can. But guys,
introduce new people to the Shenmue series with it.
Yeah,
definitely,
absolutely. More people, the merrier into Shenmue. And if this is a potential way in for people to understand how and why we are so passionate about this thing. But guys, thank you as always for dropping in on the content. James and I appreciate it very much, and we'll be back with streams, videos, lore, everything. As we keep pushing towards Shenmue 4, and hopefully we get some sort of Shenmue 4 news as the year progresses. But for now, guys, take care. Have a good one. It's a goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me. And I just want to say thanks to Adam for all the hard work he's put in. I think we definitely need to thank him as well.
Yeah. So Adam, mate, if you're watching this, stellar job. Thank you. Well done. And you've earned yourself a darn good rest.
Cheers, guys.
Take it easy.
Oh, look at the time.